um, sorry, Alice is like screeching while like disinformation spreads quicker than real information, and so people are just like, well, how about this and this and this, and you're like, I don't know how to tell you this without telling you that you are reading false information.
Yeah.
Like with like this is white supremacy talking, like I don't know. So yeah. Anyway, that's been my really, really toughest thing, and yeah. But I'm like coming around to the idea that might be part of life right now, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like, are we willing to, like, would we be willing to give up cherished relationships for the cause of racial injustice? Like, would we be willing to do that? And that's a really hard thing.
And sometimes I'm like, no, maybe not. Like, I don't know. And so I'm like, obviously, you
have the privilege to be able to do that.
Right, I do. And and I'm not sure that's the right answer. That is just my current answer, right? Like,
right.
And so, yes, you're right. I definitely, that is a privilege for me. And
we all have our limits. Like, that's, it's a reality.
But I like it's me trying to find a balance of like being able to do this and not, go into serious depression and stuff, which, that's, but yeah, it's tough. And I know it's not tough compared to everyone else, but that's just when we're talking about what are some of the things we have to give up. Like, those are some of my things.
That hits really hard right there. Yeah, anything to add to that? Anybody? In terms of what we have to give up. Just thinking that through. Charlotte, you had some points back here that I never quite got to. Oh, are we good to change tracks for a second? Okay, because Charlotte's adding more things. She says, I think for me it depends on the relationship. I'm not willing to give up close friends and family, but that person I'm Facebook friends with and haven't talked to in years, sure. I realize I'm super privileged to be able to decide which relationships I want to include discussions on race. Yeah.
My friends have gotten really... Go ahead.
Oh no, you go for it. I'll go second.
Be stupid. I'll just say my friends list has gotten really small this summer.
Well, especially in terms of like good friends. It's like, look, I have friends. Look at you guys on my screen. Like, it's like, oh, I'm really glad that, because I guess when we all decided to be friends, we weren't doing questionnaires about, so what are your views on this? And that's probably a really good thing, because not all of us were in a group place at that time. Like, there would have been a lot of diversity on questions about racial justice and what we thought about it back in the day. And I'm just like, wow, I lucked out a little bit to like come out on the other side with some friends. When I say the other side, that sounds too much of a completion, but or even to be able to come out, like, for example, like with a marriage still, like there's a lot in that of there would have been some relationships there. It's like, I don't know, we joke about this, but like, I'm not sure I would have coped being in a relationship with a Trump supporter at this time in my life. Like, I'm not sure that would have survived. And that sounds like really drastic, and not everybody does that. And not everybody needs to make that choice to do that either. Like, it's not saying that you just everyone has to just go out and do that, but like,
and like, I kind of also think about it in like, I have cut off a few people in my life, which it just ended up being a really, really like just toxic stuff with some of this stuff. And I'm like, you know what? You are like Charlotte, right, was saying, like, some of them it's just like random Facebook friends. You're like, I don't need this in my life, like sort of thing. We don't have a relationship anyway, like, but some people I'm like, do you know what? You are so important in my life. And I hope also that by continuing our relationship, I will be able to also make a difference, maybe that we can continue to have conversations. So rather than like making this so nasty that they will never like want to talk to me or whatever, sorry. But at the same time, not just being a pushover and being like, no, well, I don't want any confrontation or something.
Right.
So it's a really hard balance between thinking, no, do you know what? If I can take this slowly, I think we could progress on this rather than that. So that's where I haven't figured it out yet. So it's like, okay, how much to say at one time?
Well, let us know when you figure out the line, Catherine, and then we can all...
Right. And for some people, it's just like, okay, this will honestly probably never work. But anyway, I'm gonna just mute myself for a minute because Alice is.
Charlotte was going back to a point when one of her first favorite episodes were ones about the history of like how the idea of whiteness was made, and how the definition of whiteness and then consequently blackness has changed over the years. But there was some just really good history in there.
Yeah, that the Indian guy and what's it?
Oh yeah, Citizen
Remind me.
Signed or whatever. That was the one.
Those were super interesting court cases, and it was just mind blowing. It's like, why are we arguing this? Like, I don't know, not we, but you know the.
Right. So that was when you had
the citizenship.
There were two separate ones, yeah, and basically the court was like, look, you can make these arguments that may be very logically sound arguments, like the literal definition of like Caucasian is from the Caucasus regions, which is where you're from. But we all know a brown Hindu is not white. Like, we know it when we see it.
We meant white.
That's what this is.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing more than just we know it when we see it. Like, or you appeal to like, oh, the science. So that was the science. Like the scientists all say that I am white, you know, and I want access to that. Clearly you are not. And or just was it like a Japanese person who was like, look, I'm literally.
Oh yeah, he's like, my skin is whiter than yours.
Paler than yours.
Yeah.
Can I also be included? No.
Yeah.
I do think that those the episodes at the beginning, what were they called? They were called,
I was gonna ask for a reminder on those ones because I remember those being really interesting too, but I can't remember. I feel like they were like, oh, here maybe.
Yeah, there was part 2 was how race was made, and so it talks about like when did the notions of black and white come into play, and then it was made in America, so it's like American specific version of slavery, and then on Crazy We Built a Nation, which is a great title. I love that one. And like how we built all our societal constructs, Constitution, Founding Fathers was all in that episode. I think those 3 are really important historical background for this kind of stuff. What was I thinking? Yeah, so like the very last episode called Transformation is the one where they talk about like what should we be doing differently and what could be done, and they kind of sum up like, what are your takeaways from this whole thing? And the takeaways that that John Buin had were, number 1, like this is the whole thing that we've studied in a construct, would be like, race is a construct. Like, it's not real, and it's not real. And it was made up. And like that's a really big deal. And then number 2, the reason why it was created was to justify exploitation. And to like have that in a little summary, he's like, those seem kind of small and basic, and yet like what would it mean if not just people, but like people who have actual like power in institutions, like what if, who had the ability to change things, what if everybody understood that?
Yeah.
It's just an interesting thing I keep coming back to, of just like, it is solidified in our head that the differences came first, race came first, and we saw race and we interpreted it as tribal people, and we're like, oh, people different than us, going to oppress them. Instead of being like, you know what, this is just good for us to have this power. We want this money and oppression from the slave trade, from these kind of things. So what's the reason we can do that and still feel good about ourselves? And everything since then is what we see.
I think one of the tricky things with that, though, is I think most of the people that we interact with, but the large majority of people would agree that like race is a construct to some degree, and that all men are created equal, or we're all children of heavenly parents, or like all that stuff.
Whatever
like,
they say, yeah.
basically, like, you agree that they agree that everyone should be equal and that there should be no difference among us, and therefore we shouldn't act differently or treat different, or like treat black people differently,
Yeah.
or we shouldn't give reparations, or we shouldn't give them extra privileges because we're all supposed to be equal. Like we're all like,
Yeah.
so I think that also comes back on the other side of a lot of people, I think, agree that everyone should be equal, and they want to just pretend that we're already all equal, and if we just pretend that we're all equal, then
Yeah.
everything will just help, and like there really isn't any racism at all, or
Yeah.
racial injustice. So
Yeah,
And
they're
that really
forgetting
comes-
that second point that he brought up, which is, and this is why people exploited other people.
right.
Like, yeah, exploitation happened. Like if exploitation didn't exist today, then there wouldn't be, like, if we didn't need to exploit people to gain power and money, then there wouldn't need to be any racism. Like, it would just kick the legs out from under things.
Mhm.
Because there were that sounds really out there and futury, but it does, like, again come back to that whole like white affirmative action of just like, well, we're just equal, let's just be equal, and just pretending that there's no ladder, that I brought myself up here, and just be like, look, and now we're fine and everything's equal. Like, it just doesn't work that way, to pretend that all of this other stuff is not still having an effect.
Yeah, or they think like, well, we had civil rights movement in the 60s, like all the racial systemic issues are now gone.
Martin Luther King fixed it.
All like everything's been fixed now. Like now we're just good to live and happy, peaceful people, and not acknowledge any of that.
And I think that's super like even more so, like I feel like that's one of the reasons why racism, like I hate to say even more dangerous, but like the current form of systemic racism is like even harder to overcome than it has been in the past, because it's so stealth mode. Like stealth mode racism.
Yeah, it'd be easy if there were like laws that said
Right. I mean, obviously it wasn't easy at the time for them to overcome it, but they were able to like, look, point to this, you know, and at those times people did the same thing they do now, is like, they're like, well, there's a reason for that, because we do that today. We're like, you know, because there are obviously still huge inequalities, but because there's no specific laws on the books that or whatever, even though there are actually still, but even though like some of the biggest ones, like, you know, you're not allowed to have slaves and those kind of things, like they're no longer there. And so it's like, we look at these huge inequalities, like, why is there so much poverty and within communities of color? Like, why is that a thing? And we're like, well, there's no laws holding them back, so it must be something innate. Like, that's the only other explanation. Like, we're not doing anything, so it must be something there. And that's kind of like what they did, you know, pre-civil rights movement, is like, the law's there for a reason, because or even like after like during the Reconstruction period, when it was just like, these people just literally got out of slavery and were actually doing really well and creating schools and voting and just being good citizens, but also, you know, like, it's a bit of a struggle. We were just slaves. We've never left the plantation. We just got kicked off the plantation with nothing. And now we have to build a life. And it was this whole, like, we have to have black codes that stop them from doing anything, because otherwise they're just going to be lazy and these kind of things. Like, it always goes to, it's not me. Something innate in them, and we see that a lot today. Yeah. Catherine, I like your hallway. Oh, sorry, I was just...
I was gonna say,
Sorry,
it's just like,
I shouldn't have my video on. I'm trying to pick up.
it's just
No,
to keep the status quo, right? Anything to like keep the power and
Right. And that's what
keep
it
it how
really
it
is.
is.
It's about being able to have that power and exploitation, but we don't ever want it to be that. That would be too simple, and we'd have to change it. With that. No, that was before. This was about Citizen Bind. We didn't really.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't say this. Charlotte saying, like, I thought it was super interesting how he used his own discriminatory actions against people with darker skin than him as proof of his whiteness. Just talking about the Hindu guy who wanted, was he Hindu? I like he was Hindu. Citizenship. Like, he's like, I'm white because I act white.
I think
And
he
it
was
this
Sikh.
He was Sikh? Okay, see, yeah, I was like,
Yeah.
Well, I hear a lot of like, people were okay with, like in schools or whatever, friend groups, a group of white friends with like one black person. They're okay with that one black friend because he acts white, or because like he's not as black as the other people, like culture-wise, or like how he talks or whatever.
yeah.
So we kind of frame it in that way, like, oh, you've elevated past your other like black friends and family,
Right.
and now you're one of us white people that talks normally or dresses normally or whatever.
Who here has seen the little movie with Rue when she's older, Amandla?
Oh, The Hate You Give?
The Hate You Give.
So good.
That one. Because like that was an advantage of like she's got like white Star, her name's Star, and black Star, like when she's hanging out like in her white school, like almost entirely white school, she's a very different version of herself than when she's with her black friends at her home, like in her community. It was just a really interesting example of that code switching, because we're just really uncomfortable with that. Yeah, so just from that guy from India as well, because I thought the most interesting thing I have on that is like that I thought was really interesting, because it was this idea that he recognized. Charlotte wants to know if we're going to watch that in this group, and we totally should.
We should.
I'm actually sad we didn't watch it like when there were more protests happening, because I feel like it's the perfect movie to like understand protests and like what's going on, and not just being like everybody breaking stuff. Like, you felt the emotions from it of, and not just an emotional reaction, but I read, sorry, I'm all over the place right now, but I read somebody, like, it was just one of those stupid Facebook memes, so like not really important, but it was talking about the Hunger Games. I always like to bring my fiction into this, and it talks about like, you watch the first movie, and when Rue again, we love Rue. You know, when she dies, spoiler, and then in the movie, District 11 all goes out and starts rioting. And they're like, if you were on their side in that, like, you understand what this is. Like, you understand, like don't be the people that are like, you know, like, would you do that to them in order to be in that you know, fake fictional movie, to say, well, why are they doing that? Like, why are they destroying their own community? Like, why don't they just try and do this in a different way? Like, it makes sense to us in a good bad movie dynamic. Like, we're like, yeah, like, Like, burn that down. Like, you need to be heard. But as soon as it's like real and it threatens us and we're the capital, it's like, like, sit down, behave yourselves. And so that's a really interesting thing. And that was a distraction from my point I was going to make. The point that I was going to make was that guy who wanted to be recognized as white because he was from a higher caste system. He's like, look, I'm from a higher caste. I want to join your higher caste. That just makes sense. Like, he saw that there was a caste system. Like, he came from a country where it was, and he's like, I recognize this. I know what's going on here. Like, this is a caste system. And that's not something the words that we like to really use in terms of that.
I was thinking the same thing, like, yeah, we look down on India for having a caste system, and maybe it's more blatant, maybe it's whatever, worse in some ways, but it's the same thing. It's the same idea.
Yeah. We just, yeah, for some reason it's not the same because we have justifications and reasons, and it's just criminals who are on the bottom caste, and that's not anything to do with us and our creation of criminal justice system or our definition of crime or our definition of criminals. That doesn't have anything to do with us, of course. It's just people making bad choices. So we can wash our hands of that right there. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. We were all over the place there. When I say we, me, I said a lot of different things. Don't have more thoughts on that one or anything around that? Because I kind of wanted to move on because like the whole thing is called Seeing White. We haven't talked a ton about whiteness yet. And like, what is whiteness? And about Chenjerai's challenge that he talked about of just like, what does it mean to you as an individual to be white? And what do you come out of this experience like knowing about yourself or any of those things? They don't have any thoughts about like what whiteness means to them.
I thought it was really interesting how I think it was Chenjerai bringing up just labeling somebody as white is enough to make us go like, wait, what? Like, I'm an individual. I shouldn't be in a category.
The audacity.
Like thinking that just whiteness is the default or that we're outside of race when really we're not. Like whiteness, like we're responsible for the part that we play and the privileges that we have. Yeah. I don't know where I was going with that, but it's like it's okay for us to look at ourselves the same way that we look at other people and say, like, if I have individual thoughts, then obviously other people who don't look like me do as well. Yeah. It's not just unique to me.
I feel like
yeah,
there's like,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, if there's one word that we associate with whiteness, it's individual. Like, it just crops up in so many areas. It's like, just as you said, like, we can't even cope with the label. Yeah. Like, being like white people, like a group of white people, like using that collective is like hate speech, apparently. Like, people cannot deal with being white.
If we want to be seen as individuals and we were taught to do that, why wouldn't other people, like, why can we be individuals but not people of color? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, don't you think they want to feel the same way? Don't you think they want to be taken for their own person, not just clumped into some racist ideal? And I think that's a way to try and empathize and be like, yeah, that does feel unfair to group me in a whole group.
Yeah.
Wonder how that felt for, other groups,
years of history.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like almost the concept of like the creation of this idea of whiteness is like, we are humans, although technically it's white men at this point when they're creating it. Like, we are the individuals. And these people have to be less than human, or something else that is just like less than with that. Yeah, and it's like when people are talking about solutions, white people always go to individual solutions. They did that a little bit in the podcast where they talked to people and they were like, what do we do about race relations in our country? And everyone's like, well, we all need to respect each other and we all need to be kind and to do our best to learn about each other. Like, this is all really good stuff. It doesn't really solve racism.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like our only construct of, well, it's kind of like what we were saying earlier of just like we don't associate with all these affirmative action things that affected us because we're an individual. So we can't, it's like our brains literally can't process being part of a societal trend that brought us to a privileged point. It's like we can't process it. Like, it doesn't go into our thing. Like, we are individuals, and that is our concept of whiteness. And so that's why we can't use that history in an informed way to see our own privilege, and why we can't come up with solutions because it's just individual. All things.
There was a really good line from that last episode that I wrote down, so I'm going to read it. Said, all we need for white supremacy to continue on is for us to go about our lives being non-racist, good, kind people. Just this idea that we don't need people who are outwardly hateful and like super vocal and racist for racism to still be perpetuated, because it's at the structural level and the systemic level.
Yeah.
And like, it doesn't need us to be outwardly vile. Like, the system's working just fine with us thinking we're being kind and nice.
Yeah. And we might even be being kind and nice. Like, yeah. we may truly be acting out in our individual lives. We may even remove all of our own bias. We may even, like, even if we went that extra step, not just to be non-racist, but we removed all our personal bias and we exist in that way, and racism is still there. Like, it's still functioning, and we are still functioning within that unless we are dismantling it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and interrupting it every chance we get.
So let's talk a little bit about so we can't leave it up to the individuals.
So does that we all have to get into politics to make any change?
There's a really good question.
Like, I've just been trying to grapple with that, because we can't make a difference individually to the systemic racism.
Yeah.
What can we do? Like, is it only politics? Like, I'm hoping, like, voting.
I don't want to do politics.
Well, honestly, I've been like, maybe I should do something on the local level. I don't know. Like, I've been thinking, I'm like, okay, maybe I should do some like phone calls for Biden or something, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
Charlotte does that.
Yeah.
Good job, Charlotte.
Yeah.
You can join. It's super easy, and if you only have 10 minutes, you can do it for only 10 minutes. So it's
just don't
super handy.
Have you looked up the slots and it's like, sign up for a 2-hour session? I'm like, I can't do that with kids right now. I have 1 hour during the day.
Yeah, they ask people to sign up for sessions, but it really doesn't matter. You can just go and make calls for 10 minutes, and they're like, thank you so much. So, yeah.
Have you done any for anyone local, Charlotte?
Yes. Daisy Bonania?
Yeah. She's cool.
She's really cool.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, like, so if we're talking politics here, like, it doesn't even require people to run. It's not like you have to go run for office, but like, there's a lot. I just feel like this engagement that a lot of us have in politics that we didn't have. Like, I'm going to this election and I'm like, dang, like, I know a ton of the races and like who's in it, and I'm going to be watching. It's not just be like, who's president and who's not president. It's going to be like Senate, like who, like all these things. I'm like, I know these people, like that engagement. I was watching that voting documentary that I posted on the group on Netflix, and it talks a lot about like the effect of like big corporations and money. Basically funneling money into these causes. But it also talks about like the importance of actually people, like we actually can, like in small races locally, our money that goes to donations actually makes a big impact because the levels of money are so much smaller. And so like that's been, Charlotte, go ahead.
You can run a great campaign for city council for like $5,000 to $10,000, which is so little money compared to running for president. Right. So like even if you give $50 and their whole campaign is $5,000, like that's a significant contribution.
Yeah, and there's still time before this election. I should maybe post a thing because there was some candidates who I really like, you know, and especially this folded in really well with like, because we have some great local candidates here in Arkansas that are people of color, which is fantastic. Like, I know this is not, I don't know if you guys live in, I think we all live in the same district, but if we send Joyce Elliott to Congress, who's not our choice, we can't vote for her, I don't think, but she's in a different district in Arkansas, but she'll be the first woman of color, or I think black woman to go to Congress from Arkansas. And like, that's a big deal. I was like, I will donate to your campaign. Like this, like, I'm hoping, like, I would honestly like feel bad if like she didn't get in and I was like, I didn't donate anything to her because I was like, I could have donated and maybe it would have made a difference, you know? Anyway, I'm just encouraging everybody. I'm like, we got off topic a little bit here because this is only one small slice, but like, this is one of those things, like if you can give up something, like put that cash flow into where it's going to make a difference with that. I'm just like sermonizing over here. I shouldn't sermonize on you guys. I'm sorry.
In this final hour, do you think it's just like, I was considering donating this week, but I'm like, it might have been too late. Do you think it's like too late?
Not too late. Not too late.
Right, keep going. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm desperate at this point.
Yeah.
Come on, please.
I know, you're just like, oh my goodness, guys. Election night, I don't know how I'm going to cope.
I don't know how I'm going to cope the day after with having to work either.
Yeah, no, I may be. See, there's some sort of privilege in like having kids, and that's my work, because on like unnecessary times, the TV comes out, and that is okay. It's like, you know, like doing therapy today. I'm like, it's so easy for me to do therapy now because I'm like literally like, it's time for my therapy. Children get extra show time, you know, like that's awesome. Anyway, I don't know why we were talking about that. Charlotte was saying right here, city council makes a lot of decisions on local policies that impact racial disparities. So that's like something I feel like I've come to know in the last couple of months of like how big like local politics are, like how much of an impact they make. Like we love to go to the top of the ticket and be like, okay, this one matches with me, but like the local races actually have a huge impact. I did not process that.
I don't even know how to find out anything about candidates like those sort of questions, because I read all on their websites, but their websites are just spiel. They're just like, I don't know, you know, they just give their nice, like, I think, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, this actually doesn't answer any of my questions. Like, how have you guys, if any of you have, like, engaged with that or found out what their actual policies are on, like, you know, equality and the actual making changes and that type of stuff? Anyone know?
Yeah, so I emailed everyone running for city council who I didn't already have a decision made about, because anyone I wasn't able to make a decision based on what I was able to Google and find, I emailed them and asked them like their priorities for city zoning and budget. I asked about what role they thought the city should play in helping vulnerable communities during COVID. I'm trying to remember what other questions I asked. I asked a bunch of questions.
You have
they emailed us back. Yeah, I came up with more questions after that.
Yeah.
Do you think you could like? I don't know. Maybe you have, but I don't know. But like, if you find those questions, like, could you post them on the Facebook group? just because I'm kind of at a loss to like, I don't know, I struggle to come up with what I would ask them that would help me figure it out. But those are like really good questions, and I would love that. You
Yeah.
would be.
And for people who are already on city council, I'd also ask them like what they're most proud of accomplishing already, because some people will say they'll tell you a lot about what their priorities are based on what they're most proud of.
That's really smart.
Did they all email you back?
All but like 3 of them, but I emailed like 15 people.
Oh.
So that was pretty
Awesome.
fun. Yeah.
Charlotte wrote right here, so for example, some people running for Bentonville City Council are focused on protecting single-family housing and not allowing more low-income housing. Like, I think a lot of people out themselves in that kind of way. Because I feel like, especially we're all in these Republican areas where it's like, yeah, sometimes the stuff people focuses on, if their platform right now is including strengthening and supporting like law enforcement, like that's a little iffy at this point, as opposed to wanting to strengthen and support our communities of color. Like people are drawing lines in the sand right there. I actually have to say, oh no, I'm going.
There were also a few people who seemed to only be running on the fact that they are conservative Christians. And so they didn't get my vote because I think you should have more to qualify you than your religion.
I got so many little things in the mail there's literally nothing on there but like this guy and like his family, like his attractive like family, and it's like, yay you.
Of him in his glory days throwing a football.
Oh wait, Amanda, you're really quiet. What was that?
It said pictures of him in his glory days with his football jersey and.
Oh yeah, and that.
I
Like,
hate
no,
that
literally
so much.
that.
I'm like, I don't care if you have the best policies. Get out of high school. Like, grow up.
Football star. Nothing wrong with that. But I also did learn a lot about candidates by seeing their responses. You know, when it was going around crazy and everyone was like, what do you think about Black Lives Matter? Like, everybody had to like post on social media to be like, to either make a statement this way or that. And like a lot of the candidates were, that I was following were like made specific posts about like Black Lives Matter. And that gives an indication of a direction that they're going. Like, especially if they come out strongly for or against. Charlotte, you may have to, we can talk about this later, but I'm not sure I've got all the candidates for city council sussed out exactly in my head, so
Okay.
we could have a discussion about that.
I can go grab my paper with notes and I can tell you guys why I decided for everyone.
I would love
If
that.
you want.
Yeah, it's like Amanda already voted.
That would be
she's
so
not
awesome.
I
included.
did. I already voted.
Right back.
Thank you. That's great.
Well, Catherine can't vote for our city council.
Interestingly, in my, actually it's not my district, but in Salt Lake, they have an interesting thing is that there is a black guy running, but he's super pro-Trump supporter.
Oh yeah, he's awful. He's awful.
He's awful, but I'm just like, darn it, like the one black guy running.
Oh, just as a distraction before we get too distracted in city council, I wanted to talk to Catherine's big question of like, is it just politics? Like, is that all that we have to do? And I was listening to a podcast I listen to sometimes with Sean King and The Breakdown, and he talked about like finding your thing, because he says like this system of oppression that we currently live in is just it's so multifaceted, and there are 1,000 ways to make a difference, and you can pick maybe one or two, but you can't do them all. And we just get to like, well, we need to do this, and education, and there's racism in education, and we've got mass incarceration, and we have police brutality that we're dealing with, and then we have economic inequality, which is racially charged but also not as well. Like, there is like poverty everywhere and everybody should not be in poverty, and just like 1,000 different things, you know, like one of the, you know, I'm really interested in just in kids and gender expression and making sure, you know, like we support all children, LGBTQ, everybody, and all those kind of things. Like there's 4,000 ways, and what is your way? And, you know, that's what he really talked about. Like, it's just like, pick one. And you go at that one hard and you make an impact, but you'll have much more of an impact with one thing than you will do with trying to put your hand in 50,000 different pies, which is actually a little bit what I'm doing.
Is he talking about race in particular, or approaching?
No, pick something that makes the world better.
Cool.
And you can't do all of it.
Yeah.
Or even most of it. And so, like, for example, like, I'm just outing you here really a bit, Cami, but, you know, Cami's been volunteering with the Trevor Project, which is a suicide helpline for LGBTQ teens. That makes an impact.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
And
And
time I talk to there's so many times when kids will talk about how like they're super suicidal, but they don't want to tell anyone because their family can't afford for them to go to therapy or like rehab. It's like, I can talk to people and hopefully help them feel better, but the bigger issues, like we should have access to healthcare. They shouldn't have to decide between their family being broke and staying alive. It feels like I'm making a difference, but also just gets me even more riled up about the bigger issues.
Yeah, I think that kind of the idea is like there are groups who are doing work and it's not on an individual, like me talking to one other person, maybe changing their minds, maybe not, me treating somebody well and examining my own bias, like all that's individual stuff. But when there are organizations, and there are a ton of them, and not all of them are doing good work or whatever, but like you find ones that are doing what you're interested in, like the what's the guy, the Just Mercy movie guy?
Equal Justice Initiative.
Oh yes, Brian Stevenson, from the Equal Justice Initiative. Like, they're just working a lot with like the legal system, and you know, he originally got his start working with the death penalty and how that's applied, and just like in that area. And so donating to that cause, or being part of that, more than just like, I feel like you can donate to a whole bunch of areas, and that's one thing you can do.
Yeah, because
like,
there's something to, I don't know, something you're like directly involved with almost. But I don't know, I've been struggling because I think before this all came up, I feel like my main focus almost was like womanhood, like feminism, especially in the Mormon church and stuff. And I feel like that's almost somewhere where I can have a physical difference in my area. Like I can educate people and do talks and, you know, lessons, and, you know, have an sphere of influence where I feel so lost and floundering in this, you know, the racism talks, where I'm just like, I'm a newbie, I know nothing, I'm the one that needs to change myself, you know, where I'm like, how do I make this systemic difference when I just know nothing, and I'm an outsider in this, but I'm like, I'd like to, but also like where I can speak personally to, you know, the feminism sort of issues. I can't in this, and I'm like, how do I make a difference in something where I'm outside? But like being an outsider doesn't mean I can't make a difference. Like that's what I've been learning. Like it needs white people to make a difference.
Right.
So I know those are no easy answers probably, but I do like that idea that it's okay also. Like I don't think it gives me permission to give up on anything.
It's so hard to leave stuff on the table where you're like, but then mass incarceration, and I'm not focusing on that, and people are dying, and like it's really hard. Like that's just really hard to leave stuff on the table that's like such a big deal, and then why we want to like, I'm gonna solve everything. I have to like be super passionate and think about everything, and there aren't particularly easy answers, I would guess, but like I think it's just really important to remember that there are groups who are doing stuff, so tapping into that can give us a better framework rather than feeling like we have to recreate the wheel. every time. There.
So I can't
The only
find
other
all my
thing. Oh,
notes.
Catherine said her phone died. Sorry.
Oh,
Carry on.
I can't find all my notes, but I can give you guys a quick summary of what I remember if you want.
Awesome.
Okay, so word one, position one. I don't know if Emily's probably in this. I don't know if anyone else is. Tim Robinson is partly running because he thinks he can represent Walmart in city council. And I don't think Walmart needs a representative. I just catered to them. So didn't vote for him. Bonnie Adams, I liked what she had to say. She talked about she believes that wearing masks actually works and helps, which not everyone did.
Right.
She thinks it's important to mix a lot of options within a 1 to 3 mile radius of a neighborhood. So like a mix of apartments, townhomes, and single family homes all within a neighborhood. Kind of like our neighborhood is.
Can I pause you for a second real quick?
Yes.
Since I am recording this, do we want to just finish up with any particular notes on this, and then I can stop recording so
That's
that
fine.
I just don't know if everyone would be interested in city council race. I'm like, we're all just like, oh, we need this.
Yeah.
That just, sorry, occurred to me, and I hate to stop you right there. I feel like that was rude. But is there anything anybody wanted to add that? Because we kind of end with that point of what do we do about it on this point onward? Was there any topics that anybody really had that we didn't touch on at all with it?
I just thought it was interesting that this podcast was made 2 years ago. And it wasn't, I don't know if it would have been on my radar without you posting it, but that's just interesting to me.
Yeah,
That it's so relevant right now, but it was recorded a couple years ago.
Yeah. Oh yes, this is one quote that just reminded me of it. Said that like it wouldn't take that many white folks to change the system. So what's holding us up? Like it doesn't, like in terms of like it doesn't need everybody to have their minds changed, but enough of us, like if enough of us could get the right ideas, like it would make a huge difference. The season 4 of this podcast is called Democracy, is about democracy. And that wasn't super interesting to me when it first came out. I was like much more interested in like, well, I'm just really fired up about racial justice and those kind of things. And then I listened to it and I was like, dang, it's so good and it's so topical with what's going on. Like it's basically about racial justice and inequity and all these kind of things again. So if anybody, oh, welcome back, Catherine. If anybody here or listening, like that is an excellent follow-up to talk about. We're talking about this season 4. And for anybody who else is interested, season 3 is about feminism. So basically it's called Men, and it's about men.
Why men are awesome.
Sounds interesting.
Did you say you've already listened to that one?
Yes.
Okay,
I have to say,
saw it
I
on
feel
there
like
and I was
maybe my favorite season was season 4 on democracy. I just felt like it tied together so much of that stuff in racial injustice. So, but that one's even longer. Like I felt like the individual episodes were longer.
Yeah, they're super long. They're like twice as long as this season.
These ones are 29 minutes.
But really good. Like I was getting in tons of Facebook fights and pulling up my notes saying, well, actually, the Constitution. Yeah.
That's how we make a difference, Cami. We're not Facebook fights.
Oh.
So I'm teasing it, but I'm like, oh, that's pretty much what I do. So, okay. Any other thoughts, Catherine, before we were just going to finish up?
Yeah, sorry, my phone died. So
yeah, no, then we're going to talk city council.
Okay, yeah, no, I don't. So I just wanted to come and say thank you for a great book club.
Yeah, this was a good one. I really enjoyed re-listening to everything. it's amazing when you come back to something after like a year and you're like, okay, I'm in a completely different perspective now, coming to this like it was good and now it's good again. I feel like John Buren, like he talked about that. He's like, I've been doing this, and then I go to these lectures and stuff, and I'm just like, and still there is more, and having this laid out all the time, like it just does that. And I think that's why it's important to like have this that we're doing. So well, cool.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop recording now. So hopefully I pressed the right button. So do you want to stop recording?